She was dying, and the 3 people she once called her brothers stood over her and watched. Elysia lay broken on the cold marble floor of the Duke's mansion, blood spreading beneath her in a slow, dark pool, and not one of them moved. The eldest, Cassian, the perfect heir, simply checked his golden pocket watch, as if her death were an appointment he was impatient to be done with. The second, Cale, the genius everyone adored, leaned against a marble pillar with his arms crossed and a bored little smile, watching the mana drain out of her the way a man watches a candle burn down. And the youngest, Ren, sweet Ren, the boy she had raised, the boy she had shielded from every beating, the boy she had loved like he was her own blood. Ren crouched down beside her, brushed a strand of hair from her face with a gentleness that made her heart break all over again, and whispered, "Thank you for everything, sister." And then he drove the dagger deeper. And as the last light drained from her eyes, she heard him laugh. 10 years. For 10 years she had given that family everything she had. Her loyalty, her labor, her love, her power. And this? A knife in the dark, and 3 men watching her bleed? This was how they repaid her. But death, it turned out, was not the end of Elysia's story. Because the moment her eyes closed on that cold marble floor, they opened again somewhere else entirely. Warm sunlight, the smell of horses and summer dust, the heavy iron gates of the Duke's estate towering above her, and her own 2 hands, small, uncalloused, the hands of a child. She had gone back, 10 years into the past, to the very first day she was ever brought to that cursed house, a 15-year-old orphan standing at the gates, about to walk into the family that would one day murder her. Except this time, she remembered everything. Every betrayal, every lie, every smile they wore while they watched her die. And this time, she was going to make them pay for all of it. Let's start from the beginning, because to understand her revenge, you have to understand exactly how deep the betrayal went. Elysia was born a commoner, an orphan with nothing to her name, raised in a crumbling church orphanage on the poor edge of the imperial capital. She had no family, no money, no title, and no future. But what she didn't know, what nobody knew, not even her, was that buried deep inside her chest was something extraordinary, a dormant mana core. And not just any core, a forbidden one, of a kind the Empire hadn't seen in 300 years, sleeping quietly and waiting for the day it would wake. The Duke's family did not adopt her out of kindness. That was the first lie, and it was the foundation everything else was built on. The truth was that Duke Ravencroft's court mage, a cold old man named Val, had sensed that sleeping core during a routine blessing at the orphanage, and he had gone straight to the Duke with a single greedy idea: bring the girl into the house, raise her, keep her close, and when her power finally awakened, take it. That was the plan. Elysia was never a daughter. She was a harvest they intended to reap. But the first time she lived this life, young Elysia knew none of that. She only knew that a magnificent carriage bearing the crest of one of the greatest noble houses in the Empire had come to the orphanage and chosen her. A poor, forgotten orphan, plucked from nothing and brought into unimaginable wealth. She thought God had finally answered her prayers. She was so happy she cried the whole way to the mansion. And then she met her brothers. Cassian was 17 then, and already everything a noble heir was supposed to be: tall, brilliant, effortlessly cruel. He looked at the trembling orphan girl the servants brought before him, and the first words out of his mouth were, "So this is the stray father dragged in from the gutter." He didn't say it with anger. He said it with the flat, casual contempt of a man noticing a stain on the carpet. And then he turned and walked away, and did not speak to her again for a month. Cale was 15, the same age as her, and he was different, or so she believed. He smiled at her. He was warm where Cassian was cold. He showed her around the estate, taught her which forks to use, covered for her when she made mistakes in front of the servants. She thought, in those early days, that she had at least found one brother who cared. She had no idea that Cale's kindness was the most dangerous thing in that entire house, because Cale had been the one to figure out, long before she did, what she really was. And every ounce of that charm was bait. And then there was Ren. Ren was only 10 when she arrived, a small, sickly, frightened boy that the rest of the family treated like an embarrassment because his own magic was weak. The servants ignored him, his brothers mocked him, and Elysia, who knew exactly what it felt like to be the one nobody wanted, took him under her wing. She read to him when he couldn't sleep. She stood between him and Cassian's cruelty. When he was sick, she stayed up through the night at his bedside. She loved that boy with her whole heart, and it was that boy who would one day hold the dagger. For 10 years, Elysia was the perfect daughter, or she tried to be. She studied harder than any of them, because she was terrified that the moment she stopped being useful, they'd throw her back into the gutter. She endured every insult with a smile. She told herself the coldness was just the way of noble houses, that if she was patient enough, good enough, loyal enough, they would come to love her. And her power did awaken, but far, far too late. In her past life, her core didn't ignite until she was 23, and by then the family had already spent years quietly preparing to steal it. When it finally woke, Vale and the brothers moved fast. They framed her for treason, for the illegal trade in forbidden manna that had, ironically, been funding the Duke's fortune the entire time. They stripped her of her name, they locked her away, and on a cold night in the mansion she had once called home, they came to harvest what they'd been waiting 10 years to take. That was the life she had lived, that was the death she had died. But now she was 15 again, standing at those iron gates with a child's soft hands and a grown woman's burning memory. And as the great doors of the mansion swung open, and a 17-year-old Cassian looked down at her with that achingly familiar contempt and said, "So this is the stray father dragged in?" Elysia did something she had never done the first time. She smiled, a calm, easy, unbothered smile. And she said, "It's a pleasure to meet you too, brother. I do hope we'll get along." Cassian blinked. Just for a second, something flickered across his face. Surprise. And beneath it, the faintest unease. This was not the trembling, grateful orphan he'd expected. But he dismissed it, the way arrogant men always do, and turned away. He had no idea he had just met the person who was going to take everything from him. Because Elysia had a plan. She knew every card this family held, every scheme they would run, every enemy and every ally the next 10 years would bring, and she was going to use all of it. She was going to seize their power, their name, and their future, and when she was done, she was going to make every last one of them crawl. The first move was the most important, and it was the one they would never see coming. She was going to awaken her power in secret, years before any of them believed it was even possible. In her past life, she discovered the mana core inside her almost by accident, decades too late. This time, she went straight to the source. 3 nights after arriving at the estate, once the household was asleep, Elysia slipped out of her room and made her way down into the oldest part of the mansion, the abandoned lower levels, sealed off and forgotten generations ago. She remembered this place. In her first life, she had stumbled onto it as a grown woman and found something the family had lost track of centuries before. Behind a collapsed false wall, in a chamber thick with dust, sat an ancient, cracked mana stone. A relic so old, the Ravencroft family had forgotten they even owned it. It pulsed faintly in the dark, a dull heartbeat of raw power, and Elysia knew that if she could channel it, it would force her dormant core awake years ahead of schedule. She pressed both hands against the cold surface of the stone, and she poured every ounce of her will into it. The pain was beyond anything she had ever felt. It tore through her like a lightning strike, setting every nerve in her body on fire. She bit down on her own sleeve to keep from screaming and waking the entire house. Her vision went white. She felt her core, that sleeping thing that had waited 300 years, shudder, and crack, and finally, violently, ignite. When at last it was over, when she opened her eyes in the dark, they were no longer the dull brown of a frightened orphan, they glowed a deep, burning violet. The forbidden core had awakened. At 15 years old, in a dusty forgotten chamber beneath the very house that planned to steal her power, Elysia had just become stronger than Cassian would be at 25. But, and this was the part that made her dangerous, she showed no one. Not a flicker, not a hint. She walked back upstairs, washed the dust from her hands, climbed into bed, and the next morning she was exactly what they expected her to be. The quiet, obedient, grateful adopted sister. She let them keep underestimating her. She let them keep believing she was harmless, because an enemy who thinks you are weak will hand you every weapon you need to destroy them. And then she began, patiently, to turn their own schemes back on them. The first target was Kale. In her past life, she'd eventually discovered his ugliest secret, that for years, the charming genius had been slipping into her room at night while she slept, and quietly siphoning her raw mana to fuel his own meteoric rise. Everyone thought Kale was a once-in-a-generation prodigy. He wasn't. He was a thief, and she had been his mine. This time, when Kale crept into her room in the dark, believing her fast asleep, Elysia was wide awake behind closed eyes, and she let him do it. She let him take her mana, except now, with her awakened core, She controlled exactly what he received. And what she fed him, drop by careful drop, night after night, was corrupted mana. Poison, disguised as power. Kale drank it down greedily, night after night, feeling himself grow stronger, never once suspecting that the well he was drinking from was slowly rotting his core from the inside out. He thought he was ascending. He was decaying, and he had no idea. With Kale quietly poisoning himself, Elysia turned to the wider board, because revenge on 3 brothers was only the beginning. She intended to take the whole empire out from under the Ravencroft name, and for that, she needed to move in the open. Her chance came in the form of the Awakening tournament. Once every 10 years, the Empire held a grand tournament where its young nobles revealed their awakened powers to the world for the first time, competing before the Emperor himself. The prize was more than glory. The champion was granted a personal position at the imperial court, a foothold of real power that could shape a family's fortunes for a generation. In her past life, Cassian had won that tournament. He had used the fame and the imperial connection it gave him to build the exact web of influence he would one day use to frame her and destroy her. This time, Elysia was going to take it from him. But not as herself. Not yet. She entered the tournament in secret, wearing a plain mask and the drab clothes of a commoner, under a false name, an unknown nobody from the capital's poor district that no one in the Empire had ever heard of. A stray among thoroughbreds. The nobles laughed when they saw her. A masked commoner girl, with no house, no crest, no reputation, standing in a field of the Empire's most gifted young heirs. They stopped laughing very quickly. The tournament ran in brackets, one duel at a time, in a great stone arena beneath the eyes of the whole imperial capital. Her first opponent was the heir of a minor mountain house, a boy who could turn his skin to iron and who charged at the masked commoner girl, fully expecting to end the match in seconds. Elysia didn't even draw the practice blade at her hip. She simply raised one hand, and a lance of violet mana erupted from the ground beneath his feet and flung him clear out of the ring. The match lasted 4 seconds. The crowd sat in stunned silence, then broke into a confused roar. Who was she? Her second opponent was smarter and far more dangerous, a young ice mage from a prestigious northern family, who flooded the entire arena with a blizzard so thick the audience lost sight of the ring entirely. It was a technique that had won him a dozen duels. Against Elysia, it lasted less than a minute. She walked calmly into the storm, and where her violet eyes glowed through the white, the ice simply died. Her forbidden core didn't counter his magic, it devoured it. When the blizzard cleared, the northern prodigy was on his knees, his mana completely drained, staring up at a masked girl who hadn't so much as raised her voice. Round after round, it was the same. The Empire's proudest young geniuses stepped into the arena certain of victory, and one after another this nameless girl with the glowing purple eyes took them apart, effortlessly, almost gently, as if she were correcting children. The whispers in the stands grew into a frenzy. Nobles who had never once looked twice at a commoner were on their feet screaming her false name. The bookmakers, who had set her odds at 1,000 to 1, were ruined. And in the royal box, the Emperor himself leaned forward, no longer bored, watching this masked mystery with the sharp, hungry interest of a man who has just spotted something rare. And then came the final. Cassian Ravencroft, perfect heir of the great Duke's house, undefeated, unbothered, exactly as he had been in her first life, stepping into the ring to claim the crown he believed was his by right. He looked across the arena at the masked commoner girl who had somehow clawed her way to the final, and he smiled the same cold smile he would one day wear while she bled out on his marble floor. "You've had a lucky run, little stray," he called out. "It ends here." Elysia said nothing. She simply looked at him through the eye holes of her mask and let him make the first move. And Cassian gave it everything. He was genuinely gifted. She had never denied that. And he unleashed the full weight of the Ravencroft bloodline magic, a storm of crackling silver lightning that lit the whole arena white and would have flattened any of his previous opponents where they stood. The crowd gasped. For one heartbeat it looked as if the mystery girl was finished. Then the smoke cleared, and Elysia was still standing, one hand raised, his lightning caught and swirling harmlessly around her fingers like a tamed animal. She had let him spend everything. She had let him believe, for one glorious moment, that he had won. And now she looked at him, the brother who had checked his pocket watch while she died, and she closed her hand. There was a sound like the sky cracking, a single pulse of violet light, and Cassian Ravencroft, the invincible heir, was hurled the length of the arena and slammed into the far wall, his lightning gone, his mana shattered, sliding down onto his hands and knees in front of 10,000 screaming witnesses. He didn't understand. He genuinely could not comprehend how it had happened. He was the best. He had always been the best, and a nameless stray had just ended him with one strike. The arena went utterly silent. The Emperor rose to his feet, and in that ringing quiet, the Emperor's voice carried across the stone. "Remove your mask, champion. The Empire would know the name of its greatest talent in 300 years. Elysia reached up slowly. She savored it. The silence, the thousands of held breaths, the perfect air on his knees before her. And then she pulled the mask away. The gasp that went through the arena was loud enough to shake the stands. Because the champion, the masked prodigy who had just demolished the pride of the Empire's noble houses, was the Ravencroft family's forgotten adopted daughter. The commoner stray they had dragged in from the gutter. The girl they had never once taken seriously. Standing tall in the center of the arena, holding the tournament crown, with the whole Empire and her own humiliated brother staring up at her in disbelief. "My name," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of that silent arena, "is Elysia, of no house at all." By the time the Ravencroft family recovered from the shock of what they had just witnessed, it was already far too late for them. The Emperor granted Elysia the champion's position at the imperial court that very night, along with a personal title of her own, a title that belonged to her, not to the Ravencroft name. For the first time in either of her lives, Elysia had real power that no one could take away, and she began, immediately, to build. The first person she brought to her side was someone the family had thrown away, a young maid named Lyra, who in Elysia's past life had been the only soul in that entire mansion to ever show her genuine kindness, and who had been dismissed and left to starve for the crime of bringing the disgraced Elysia a cup of water on the night she was locked away. This time, Elysia found Lyra first. She lifted her out of servitude, made her the head of her own household, and gained something more valuable than any weapon, one person in the world she could absolutely trust. The second was harder, and far more dangerous, because the second was the Crown Prince. Prince Aurelius was the Empire's golden heir, sharp and guarded and impossible to read, a man who had learned long ago that everyone who smiled at him wanted something. In her past life, Elysia had never so much as spoken to him. She had died a nameless prisoner, while the prince ruled an empire that never knew her name. But this time their paths crossed at court, and Aurelius found himself fascinated, not by a woman angling for his favor, but by one who looked at the most powerful young man in the Empire and treated him with the same calm, unimpressed steadiness she showed everyone else. She wanted nothing from him. And that, more than anything, was what drew him in. Their alliance began as pure strategy. A champion with a forbidden core, and a prince who needed allies he could trust, were two blades that fit the same sheath. But somewhere between the political maneuvering and the late-night conversations in the palace library, something Elysia had buried a very long time ago began, quietly, to thaw. She had come back to this life for revenge. She had not planned on someone looking at her, for the first time in 2 lifetimes, as if she mattered. She told herself it was a complication she couldn't afford. She was not entirely convincing, even to herself. But romance would wait. Elysia had a family to dismantle. She started pulling threads. Using her position at court and Lyra's network among the servants of the great houses, she began quietly gathering the one thing that could destroy the Ravencrofts from within. The truth about where their fortune really came from. Because here was the secret at the rotten heart of the Duke's house. The Ravencroft wealth, the estates, the carriages, the influence. None of it came from honest land or trade. It came from the illegal traffic in forbidden manna, the same rare, banned power that slept inside Elysia's own core. For generations, the Duke's family had been secretly buying and selling that forbidden manna on the black market, growing rich on a crime that carried a sentence of death and the total erasure of one's house from the noble registry. And in Elysia's first life, when her power finally awakened and became inconvenient, they had done the cleverest, cruelest thing imaginable. They had pinned that entire crime on her. They had made the Empire believe that the forbidden manna in the Ravencroft ledgers came from the treasonous adopted daughter, and they had watched her die branded a criminal for their sins. This time, Elysia gathered every shred of that evidence herself, the ledgers, the black market contacts, the smuggling routes, the payments, and she made certain every trail led exactly where it truly belonged. Straight back to Cassian, who as heir had personally overseen the family's finances for years. She didn't fabricate a single thing. She didn't need to. The truth was damning enough. The family had simply always trusted that no one would ever be able to prove it. They had never imagined the one person who could prove it would be the stray they'd murdered, brought back with 10 years of foreknowledge and an imperial title. Then, one careful piece at a time, she began to take them apart. Kale was first, because Kale was already broken and didn't know it. Months of quietly drinking corrupted mana had rotted the once brilliant genius from the inside, and the cracks were beginning to show, spells that fizzled, duels he suddenly, inexplicably lost, a growing panic he hid behind that charming smile. Desperate to prove himself still worthy of the Ravencroft name, Kale challenged Elysia to a public duel before the court, certain that the luck that had carried the stray through the tournament would finally run out. Elysia accepted with a small, gracious smile, the exact smile he had worn while watching her die. The duel lasted less than a minute. Kale reached for his power, the stolen power he had been so proud of, and the corrupted core inside his chest, the one he had spent months poisoning with her mana, believing it made him strong, simply shattered. In front of the entire imperial court, the celebrated genius of House Ravencroft collapsed, his magic gone forever, an ordinary man where a prodigy had stood. He would never cast a spell again, and as he knelt there, hollow and ruined, Elysia leaned down and murmured, just for him. You drank so greedily, brother, you never once asked what was in the cup. Cassian was next, and Cassian fell the way he had made her fall, branded with a crime that was his all along. Elysia brought her evidence of the forbidden mana trade before the imperial court, laid out so completely and so precisely that there was no possible defense. The smuggling, the banned power, the ledgers in Cassian's own hand, the empire that had crowned him its greatest young heir, turned on him in a single afternoon. He raged, he denied, he screamed that it was the stray, that she had done this, that she was the criminal, the very lie he had used to kill her in another life. But this time there was no fabricating her guilt, because this time every trail led honestly and inescapably to him. The perfect heir of House Ravencroft was stripped of his title, dragged from the court in chains, and sentenced to the imperial labor prisons, where the proudest man Elysia had ever known would spend the rest of his life breaking stone. And then there was Ren, the youngest brother, the boy she had raised, the boy she had read to and protected and loved with her whole heart, and the boy who, in another life, had smiled at her and thanked her and driven a dagger into her chest. Of all the wounds the Ravencrofts had given her, his was the one that had never healed, in either life. Ren came to her alone, at night, after the house had already begun to fall. He was 17 now, no longer the sickly child she had shielded, but she could still see that boy in his frightened eyes. He didn't come with threats. He came the way he had always known how to move her, with softness. He fell to his knees in front of her, and he wept. He told her he had never wanted any of it. He told her that Cassian and Kale had forced him, that he had been a child, that he was sorry, that he had always, always loved her. He reached for her hand, reached for it with the same gentleness he'd shown while brushing the hair from her dying face, and he begged her, "Please, sister, we're family. Whatever they did, I'm still your family." And Elysia looked down at him for a long, long moment, at this boy she had loved more than her own life, at the murderer wearing the face of the child she had raised. And when she finally spoke, her voice was quiet and steady, and it broke him completely. "Family," she said. "I stood between you and every beating in this house. I stayed up through every fever you ever had. I loved you more than anyone has ever loved you, and I would have died for you." She knelt down, so that they were eye to eye, and she watched the hope rise in his face one last time before she took it away forever. "And you watched me bleed out on that floor, and you thanked me, and you laughed. So tell me, little brother, where was this family then?" She stood, she turned, and she walked away from him, and she never looked at Ren again for the rest of his life, which was, in the end, the cruelest and most fitting punishment of all. Cassian she sent to prison, Kale she left powerless. But Ren she simply erased from her heart and left him to spend his years reaching for a sister who was standing right there and would never, ever turn around. Within a single year, the great and ancient House Ravencroft, one of the most powerful noble families in the entire empire, ceased to exist. Their fortune, built on forbidden crime, was seized by the crown. Their titles were stripped. Their name was struck from the imperial registry, erased so completely, it was as if the family had never drawn breath. The Duke himself, Elysia's so-called father, the man who had ordered a frightened child brought into his home so that one day he could carve the power out of her, died a disgraced and forgotten man, in a cold and empty manner, calling out for the daughter who did not come. And the court mage Vale, who had started it all with a single greedy idea in a crumbling orphanage, was hunted down and dragged before the very forbidden manhwa tribunal he had spent a lifetime evading. They had taken everything from Elysia, her loyalty, her love, her life, and now they had nothing, and she had everything, an imperial title, the favor of the crown, the alliance, and, though she was still too stubborn to fully admit it, the heart of the crown prince, and a future entirely her own. She had won. The revenge she had died for, the revenge she had crawled back through time to claim, was complete. And it should have been the end of the story, but it wasn't. Because there was one thing Elysia had never understood, not in her first life, and not yet in this one. One question she had never thought to ask: where, exactly, had a forgotten orphan gotten a forbidden manhwa core of a kind the Empire hadn't seen in 300 years? The answer came on the night of her greatest triumph, from the one person left alive who knew it. As Elysia stood at the very summit of the Empire, finally free, the old court mage Vale, awaiting his own sentence, with nothing left to lose and nothing left to protect, asked to see her one last time. And what he told her turned the ground to ice beneath her feet. That core inside her chest, he said, the power that had made her strong enough to take her revenge. It had never been meant for a human being at all. 300 years ago, the last time the Empire saw a core like hers, it heralded a catastrophe the history books had buried so deep that almost no one remembered it. A thing that had nearly ended the world, sealed away at a terrible price by the emperors of old. That core was not a gift. It was a seal. And it was a key. Elysia had not simply been born with a rare power. She had been born carrying the lock on the cage of something ancient, and patient, and endlessly hungry. Something that had been waiting 3 long centuries to wake up. And by forcing her core to awaken years ahead of its time, by burning through it, to fuel her revenge, Elysia had done the one thing no one was ever supposed to do. She had started to turn the key. Vale smiled at her then, the resigned smile of a man watching a disaster he can no longer stop. "You came back to destroy one family," he said softly. "But you came back at the exact moment the Empire's oldest nightmare was ready to return. And you, my dear, you are the door it walks through." Elysia stood very still in the dark. She thought of the strange dreams that had troubled her sleep since the tournament, the voice at the edge of her hearing, the moments her violet eyes had glowed without her willing it. She had told herself it was nothing. It was not nothing. The revenge was never the end of her story, it was only the beginning of it. Because Elysia is the only person alive across 2 lifetimes who remembers what is coming. She is the only one who knows what her power truly is, and what it is about to unleash. And when the Empire that once dragged her from the gutter, that used her, that murdered her, realizes the ancient terror is returning, they will come crawling to the forgotten stray they threw away, and they will beg her to be the one to save them all. The question is whether she will. This is where it gets dangerous. It begins with small things. A well in a border village runs dry overnight, and when the villagers lower a lantern into it, the light simply goes out, swallowed, as if the darkness at the bottom were drinking it. A whole forest in the north withers in a single night, every leaf blackening at once. Livestock are found untouched but hollow, the life drained clean out of them, leaving nothing but husks. The Empire's scholars call it a blight, a bad season, superstition. Elysia knows better. Because every time one of these things happens, she feels it, a low, cold pull in her chest, right where her core sits, like a hook tugging at a thread she can't see, and her dreams are getting worse. Every night now she stands in the same place, a vast black chamber beneath the earth, and something enormous coiled in the dark, and a voice like grinding stone that says the same 3 words over and over: almost, almost, awake. She goes to the one person who might understand. Vale, the old court mage, now rotting in an imperial cell awaiting his sentence. And Vale, who has nothing left to lose, finally tells her everything. 300 years ago, he says, the Empire did not almost fall to war, or plague, or famine, the way the history books pretend. It almost fell to a single entity, a being the old texts only ever call the Hollow. It did not conquer, it did not rule. It simply devoured light, life, magic, memory, until whole kingdoms were nothing but silence, and the emperors of that age could not kill it. It could not be killed. So instead, at a cost that emptied the imperial treasury and the imperial bloodline both, they built a seal, and they anchored that seal inside a living human core, a vessel bred to carry it, so that as long as the vessel lived and the core stayed dormant, the Hollow would sleep. That vessel's bloodline was hidden, scattered, hunted to near extinction over the centuries, by those who wanted to control what it caged, or wake it. And the last living heir of that bloodline, Vale says, the last vessel carrying the seal of the Hollow, was a nameless orphan girl in a crumbling church on the poor edge of the capital. Elysia goes very still, because she understands now. The family didn't just want her power. Vale sensed what she truly was all those years ago, and the Ravencrofts intended to carve the seal out of her and sell it to the highest bidder, never once understanding that the thing they meant to sell would have unmade the world. You were never meant to awaken, Vale tells her, almost gently. A vessel is supposed to live an ordinary, powerless life, and die quietly, and the seal passes on, and the Hollow sleeps another lifetime. But you didn't live quietly, did you? You forced your core awake at 15. You burned through it to destroy a family. Every time you use that power, you thin the wall between the Hollow and the world, and now the wall is very, very thin. The revenge she was so proud of, the awakening that made it possible, is the exact thing that is ending the world. At first, she tells no one. What could she say? That the Empire's greatest young talent is also the door its oldest nightmare is walking through. But she can't hide it for long, because the Hollow isn't waiting quietly anymore. The border incidents spread inward. The hollowing spreads. A village, then a town, then a whole province going silent and gray and empty, the life drained out of everything that lived there, and no army in the Empire able to so much as slow it down. Blades pass through it. Fire does nothing. Magic is simply eaten. The Empire panics, and the Empire, being what it is, looks for someone to blame before it looks for someone to save it. And this is where Elysia's two lives collide in the cruelest way possible. Because the nobles, the same nobles who once ignored her, who laughed at the commoner stray, who would have let her die branded a criminal, they noticed something. They noticed that the hollowing began right around the time a nameless girl awakened a forbidden core and won the awakening tournament. They noticed that wherever the champion goes, the cold follows, and it does not take them long to decide that the monster must be her. They come for her the way they came for her in her first life, with accusations, with fear dressed up as justice, with a mob of frightened powerful men who have found a convenient throat to put their hands around. They demand the Emperor arrest the champion. They demand her core be sealed, or better yet cut out. They call her a witch, a traitor, the source of the calamity. It is, almost word for word, the same execution they staged for her once before. History, it seems, is desperate to repeat itself. But this time, Elysia is not a powerless prisoner. This time, she has a prince. Aurelia stands between her and the mob, and for the first time the golden-guarded, impossible-to-read crown prince shows the Empire exactly where he stands. He tells the assembled nobles that the woman they are trying to condemn is the only person alive who understands what is coming, and that if they cut the seal out of her, as they are so eager to do, they will not stop the Hollow. They will free it. The vessel is the last thing holding the cage shut. Kill her, and they open the door themselves. The nobles don't want to believe him, but then the Hollow answers the question for everyone. The capital's outermost district goes dark, not attacked, hollowed. In a single night, a corner of the imperial city itself is drained to silence. Thousands of lives simply gone, a gray dead scar spreading toward the palace. And standing at the edge of that scar, Elysia feels the pull in her chest surge so hard she nearly collapses, and the voice in her dreams speaks to her while she is wide awake for the very first time. "Vessel," it says, in a voice like the whole world grinding to a halt. "You carried me back through time. How considerate. Now let me out." And Elysia realizes the full horror of what she's done. When she died and regressed, she didn't come back alone. The seal, and the thing behind it, came back with her, wound around her soul. She didn't just get a second chance at revenge. She dragged the Empire's oldest death back to a point in history where it's stronger, and the people who might have known how to fight it are 300 years more forgotten. The Empire, out of options and out of time, finally does the thing it swore it never would. It comes to the stray on its knees. The Emperor himself, the man at the summit of 1,000 years of noble blood, summons Elysia. And in front of the entire court, the same court that days ago screamed for her execution, he asks her to save them. Not commands, asks. The nobles who called her a witch cannot meet her eyes. The great houses that would not let a commoner through their gates are now begging her to walk through the gates of the palace and stand between them and the end of everything. It is everything she ever wanted, the people who threw her away, kneeling, the Empire that used her, helpless without her. She could walk out, she could let it burn, let the Hollow swallow every noble who ever looked down on her. every house that ever shut its doors, and simply take the prince and Lyra and disappear somewhere the cold might not reach for a lifetime or two. For a long, dangerous moment, standing over a kneeling empire, she genuinely considers it. And then she thinks of the border village with the well that drank the light, the children in it, the people who never did anything to her, who never even knew her name, who would die gray and hollow and silent for the crimes of men in golden robes. And she understands something the Hollow is counting on her not to understand, that revenge and cruelty are not the same thing, and that the moment she lets the innocent burn to spite the guilty, the Empire's oldest nightmare has already won, because it will have made her into itself. So Elysia looks down at the kneeling Emperor, and she does not say yes out of loyalty, or love, or forgiveness. She says yes on her terms. She will hold the seal, she will fight the thing she accidentally freed, but when it is over, if there is an over, the Empire will answer for what it is. The forbidden mana trade that funds the great houses ends. The orphanages her bloodline was hunted through are protected by imperial decree, and never again will this empire be allowed to breed a human being as a living cage and call it anything but the atrocity it is. The Emperor, with a dead province spreading toward his throne, agrees to all of it. But agreeing to terms is easy when you are desperate. The hard part is still coming, because to fight the Hollow, Elysia has to do the one thing Vale warned her never to do. She has to reach into her own core, past the seal, and touch the thing on the other side, to learn how it thinks, how it hunts, how it was caged the first time. She has to open the door a crack, on purpose, and look the Empire's oldest death in the eye, and pray she is strong enough to close it again before it drags her through. And there is something else. Something Vale did not tell her, because Vale did not know. Because as Elysia prepares to descend into her own soul to face the Hollow, a hooded figure watches her, from the shadows of the palace. Someone who has been waiting 300 years for the vessel to awaken. Someone who does not want the Hollow sealed at all. Someone who has been quietly guiding the Empire toward this exact moment, since long before Elysia was ever born. The Hollow was never the only thing that woke up when she turned the key. To fight a thing that cannot be killed, Elysia has to understand how it was caged the first time, and the only place that knowledge still exists is inside her own core, on the other side of the seal, in the same black chamber that has haunted her dreams. So she decides to do the one thing Val begged her never to do. She is going to go in. The ritual is desperate and half-remembered, pieced together from Val's oldest texts. In the deepest vault beneath the palace, a circle is drawn in silver and salt, and Lyra and Aurelius take their places at its edge, as anchors, the two people whose voices Elysia trusts to call her back if she loses herself. Aurelius grips her hand so hard it hurts. "If you don't come back," he says quietly, "I will tear that thing out of you myself and follow you in to drag you home." She almost laughs. She has spent 2 lifetimes being disposable to everyone around her, and now here is a man promising to walk into the Empire's oldest nightmare rather than lose her. She holds on to that as she closes her eyes and lets herself fall, and then she is standing in the dark. The chamber inside her core is vast beyond reason, a cathedral of black stones stretching up into nothing, silent as a held breath, and coiled in the center of it, filling the dark the way ink fills water, is the Hollow. Up close it has no shape she can hold in her mind. It is an absence wearing the idea of a body, a wound in the world that drinks the light off her own skin, and when it turns its attention on her, she feels every warm thing she has ever loved grow faint and far away. But it does not attack, it speaks. The vessel walks in on her own feet, it says, in that voice like grinding stone. 300 years and none of them were ever brave enough, or foolish enough, to come to me. I have been so terribly bored. And then the Hollow does the cruelest thing it could possibly do. It offers her a gift. It shows her a future. It shows her the Empire that used her, that murdered her, that begged her, swallowed. Every noble who ever looked down on her, gone. Every house that ever shut its gates, silent. And Elysia, standing untouched at the center of it, remade into something that will never be weak, never be disposable, never be betrayed again, because there will be no one left alive to betray her. "You and I want the same thing," the Hollow whispers, "an end to the world that hurt you. Stop holding the door, let me finish it, and I will make you the last and greatest thing that ever lived." For one long moment, in the dark, Elysia is tempted, not because she is weak, because it knows exactly which wound to press. She has spent 2 lifetimes being told she was nothing by the very people now on their knees. Some buried, furious part of her would love to watch it all burn. But she thinks of Aurelius's hand crushing hers. She thinks of Lyra. She thinks of a border child at a well that drank the light, who never did anything to anyone, and she understands the trap. You keep saying we want the same thing, she says, but you don't want an end to the world that hurt me. You just want an end. You'd swallow the child in that village exactly as fast as you'd swallow the emperor. You don't hate them. You don't hate anything. That's the whole problem with you. She lifts her chin. I'm not empty. That's the difference between us, and it's the reason I'm going to beat you. The hollow's patience curdles into something colder. Then let me show you, it says, what the last vessel who defied me became. And it opens a memory, not hers, a memory 300 years old. She sees a young woman, not so different from herself, standing before a council of emperors and archmages. This is the first vessel, the one they bred and hunted and finally trapped into carrying the seal. Her name, Elysia hears, was Seraphine. And Seraphine did not volunteer to become a living cage. She was chosen against her will. A commoner girl with the wrong bloodline, bound to the hollow to save an empire that then locked her away for the rest of her life so she could never endanger the seal. A prisoner and a savior in the same breath. She spent decades alone in a tower, carrying the world's death in her chest, forgotten by the people she was dying to protect. And somewhere in those long, bitter years, the loneliness and the hollow's constant whisper did to Seraphine what the Empire's cruelty had started. She did not die 300 years ago. That was the lie in the history books. The seal made her something that does not die. And she has spent 3 centuries in the dark, nursing a hatred vast enough to match the thing she carries, waiting, patiently, so patiently, for the seal to weaken enough that she could finally do what she has dreamed of for 300 years. Not save the Empire. End it. And take the hollow's hand to do it. Elysia understands. Then, with a chill that has nothing to do with the cold. The hooded figure who has been steering the Empire toward this moment. The one who has been waiting for a new vessel to awaken and thin the wall. It isn't a servant of the hollow. It's her predecessor. It's Seraphine. The first vessel, the forgotten savior turned to poison by 300 years of being exactly as disposable to the Empire as Elysia was. She is Elysia's mirror. She is what Elysia would become if she said yes. And that is the real trap the hollow laid. Not to tempt Elysia with power. To show her that the woman who defied it once had already lost. Had already become the very thing she swore to stop. And to let Elysia realize that the road she's on ends in a tower and 300 years of hate. You will be me, Seraphine's memory says, turning to look straight at Elysia, across 3 centuries, as if she has always known Elysia was watching. You will fight, and you will win, and they will lock you away for winning, because a savior with a monster in her chest is too frightening to leave free. And in 100 years, in 200, you will understand why I opened the door. I will be waiting for you on the outside, little sister. We vessels only ever have each other. Elysia tears herself out of the memory, and out of the core, gasping, back into the silver circle beneath the palace. Aurelius's arms around her and Lyra's voice calling her name. She has what she came for. She knows how the hollow was sealed, through a vessel's willing sacrifice, and she knows the terrible price the first vessel paid, and the poison that price became. But she has learned something the hollow did not mean to teach her too. Seraphine is not invincible. Seraphine is grief. 300 years of grief given a body. And grief, Elysia knows better than anyone alive, can be reached. But there is no time to plan gently, because Seraphine has been waiting for exactly this moment, and now she moves. The hollowing accelerates all at once, no longer creeping but pouring across the Empire, and at its head, for the first time, the Empire sees her, a woman in a hood of gray, walking unhurried through the dead gray scar of a swallowed city, the hollow's darkness trailing off her like a cloak, doing to the world what the world once did to her. The panic becomes despair. Whole armies are sent against her and come back hollow, or do not come back at all. The great houses, so proud, begin to flee the capital. And a message spreads on the wind to every corner of the Empire, in Seraphine's voice. I carried your death so you could live, and you buried me alive for it. Now you will all know what the dark feels like. And here is where the betrayal comes, because it always does. Not everyone in the Empire wants to fight a losing war against an immortal grief. A faction of the surviving great houses, terrified and calculating, decide there is a smarter play than dying. Give Seraphine what she wants. She only truly hungers for one thing. The current vessel, Elysia, the seal that must be broken to free the hollow completely. So a cabal of nobles, led by men who once knelt and begged Elysia to save them, quietly decides to hand her over. If they deliver the girl to the Hollow Queen, perhaps she spares them. Perhaps the Dark eats someone else's province instead. It is, almost exactly, the logic the Ravencrofts used to sell her the first time. Elysia has now been betrayed by 3 families across 2 lifetimes, for the same reason. Because she is worth more to frightened, powerful men as a sacrifice than as a person. They come for her in the night. Noble soldiers, not monsters, men with the imperial crest still on their armor, sent to drag the Empire's only defender to the enemy in chains. And this time it is Aurelius who stands in the doorway with a blade, and Lyra with a crossbow, and a look that dares anyone to try. And for the first time Elysia does not fight her betrayers alone. They cut their way out of the palace that was supposed to protect them, and they run, the vessel, the prince, and the maid, into an empire coming apart at the seams, hunted now by both the Hollow Queen who wants Elysia's death and the nobles who want to trade it. They flee to the one place left that might hold answers, the ruined tower where Seraphine spent 300 years as a prisoner, abandoned on a cliff at the Empire's edge. And in that cold, forgotten tower, among the scratched walls where a savior slowly went mad, Elysia finds the last piece. Seraphine's own writings, decades of them, a diary of a woman being erased. She reads a life that is a mirror of her own held up to a crueler light, and somewhere in those pages she finds the thing the Hollow did not want her to find. Not a weapon, something worse for its purposes. She finds the girl Seraphine used to be, before the tower, before the hate, a young woman who once wrote, in a steadier hand, about wanting nothing grander than a small house, a garden, and someone who would remember her name. Elysia closes the diary, and she understands, finally, how this actually ends. Not with a bigger blast of violet power, not by outfighting an immortal. You cannot outfight grief, you can only reach it. To beat Seraphine, to save the Empire and close the door on the Hollow for good, Elysia is going to have to do the one thing no one has done for the first vessel in 300 years. She is going to have to see her, really see her. And she is going to have to offer the Hollow Queen the one thing the Empire never did, a choice that isn't a cage. But grief that has had 3 centuries to harden does not surrender easily, and the Hollow behind it will not let its doorkeeper go without a war. As Elysia turns from that cold tower to face what's coming, the sky over the capital splits with unnatural dark, the last free cities begin to go silent one by one, and Seraphine's voice reaches her across the whole dying empire, almost tender now, almost pleading. Come home, little sister. Stop fighting the only person left who understands you. And Elysia, standing at the edge of everything, with a prince and a maid at her back and a whole empire's fate resting on whether she can do the impossible, reach a monster's heart before the monster reaches hers, takes a breath, and steps toward the dark. Elysia does not walk toward the dark alone, and that, in the end, is the whole difference between her and the woman she's going to face. Before she leaves the tower, she does something Seraphine never got to do. She builds a plan around the people she trusts, instead of trying to carry the world by herself. Aurelius will hold the front. He is the crown prince, and even with half the great houses fled or turned, there are soldiers who will still follow the golden heir into a war nobody believes they can win. Lyra will run the shadows, moving between the pockets of the Empire that haven't gone gray yet, carrying word, gathering the ones willing to fight. And Val, pulled from his cell, because a man who knows the old seals is worth more free than rotting, will help Elysia do the impossible part. Reach Seraphine's heart before the Hollow reaches Elysia's. Because that is the real plan, and it terrifies everyone she tells it to. Elysia is not going to try to destroy Seraphine. You cannot destroy grief with a bigger fire. She learned that watching herself nearly become it. She is going to try to free her. To finish the sentence the Empire started 300 years ago, and never had the decency to end. The sentence of a girl locked in a tower for the crime of saving everyone. If Elysia can reach the woman under the Hollow Queen, the human being still buried in there, she might be able to do what no emperor ever tried. Offer Seraphine a way out of the cage that isn't more cage. Aurelius thinks it's madness. She's slaughtered provinces, he says. She wants you dead. And Elysia answers with the truest thing she knows. So did I, she says quietly. In my first life, dying, I wanted the whole world to burn with me. The only reason I'm not her is that when I came back, someone finally chose me. She never got that. Nobody ever came back for her. Aurelius goes silent. And then, because he is who he is, he says, then we come back for her. All right, show me the door. The war comes to the capital. It is not a battle so much as a siege against the end of everything. The hollowing has reached the outer walls, a slow gray tide eating the city block by block, and at its head walks Seraphine, unhurried, patient, the hollows dark trailing off her like a cloak 3 centuries long. The armies that remain do not so much fight her as hold, buying minutes with lives, while the gray creeps toward the palace. Aurelius is everywhere on that line, a gold figure in the ruin, and for the first time the Empire sees a crown that bleeds beside them, instead of hiding behind them. Lyra's people pull the innocent out of the path of the dark, one alley at a time, and through all of it, Elysia moves toward the center, toward the woman in gray, because everything they are buying with blood is time for her to get close enough to try. Seraphine lets her come. Of course she does. She has been waiting 300 years for exactly this, for the new vessel to walk to her willingly. When they finally stand face to face in the dead heart of the swallowed district, gray ash falling like snow, the Hollow Queen pushes back her hood, and Elysia sees her own future looking back at her. A beautiful, ancient, unbearably tired face, eyes like 2 burned-out stars. "Little sister," Seraphine says, almost gently. "You came. I knew you would. We always come to each other in the end. There's no one else who understands." And then she reaches out to take what she came for. Elysia's core, the seal, the last lock on the cage, to break it and let the Hollow finish the world. This is the moment Val warned about, the moment the whole Empire is holding its breath against. Seraphine's power, 3 centuries deep, closes around Elysia like a fist, and it would be so easy to answer it with violet fire, to make this the fight everyone expects. Elysia doesn't fight. Instead, she does the one thing 300 years of enemies never did. She drops her guard completely, lets Seraphine's power close around her, lets herself be utterly vulnerable to the most dangerous being alive. And she says, into that grip, "I read your diary." Seraphine goes still. "The one before the tower," Elysia says, "before all of this. You wanted a garden? A small house. Someone who'd remember your name. You saved a world that gave you a cell and a lie in a history book and 300 years alone, and you have every right to want it to burn." Her voice cracks, because she means every word, because she has been here. "But you were never a monster, Seraphine. You were a girl they threw away." "I know, because they threw me away too. And I am not here to fight you. I'm here because somebody finally should have come for you 300 years ago, and nobody did, so I came now." And she does the impossible thing. She stops holding the seal shut against Seraphine, and instead she reaches through it, not to attack, but to share. She lets Seraphine feel her memories, the church, the cold, the first betrayal, the execution, the dying wish for the world to end. She lets the Hollow Queen feel that she is not alone, has never been the only one, that somewhere across 300 years another girl carried the exact same wound, and chose, barely, at the last second, not to let it hollow her out. She offers Seraphine the one thing the Empire never did, to be seen, completely, and not condemned for it. For a heartbeat, it works. For a heartbeat, the burned-out stars in Seraphine's eyes flicker with something almost human, and the gray tide stops, all across the city, because the will driving it has faltered. 300 years of armor cracks, and underneath it Elysia sees her, the girl who wanted a garden, reaching back. But the Hollow has been listening the whole time, and the Hollow will not lose its door. It seizes Seraphine in the moment she wavers, pours itself into the crack that Elysia's kindness opened, not out, but in, wrapping around the last human part of her like a hand around a candle. "She is mine," it says, in Seraphine's mouth, in a voice that is no longer Seraphine's at all. "She has been mine for 300 years. You cannot have her back." And Elysia realizes, too late, the deeper horror of it. Seraphine is not the villain steering the Hollow. Seraphine is the Hollow's first victim, the earliest thing it ever swallowed, worn like a mask for 3 centuries, a hostage the Empire wrote into the history books as a hero and then forgot. The woman Elysia has been trying to save has been screaming inside her own body since before Elysia's grandmother was born. The Hollow, wearing Seraphine, turns its full and undivided attention on Elysia, and this time it does not tempt, and it does not talk. It strikes to break the seal by breaking her. The city burns gray. Aurelius's line shatters and reforms, and shatters again. Vale, old and spent, throws the last of himself into shoring up Elysia's failing core, and does not get back up. And Elysia, bleeding, half-hollowed, the seal cracking in her chest, understands that she now has to make the choice Seraphine was never given the chance to make cleanly. She can seal the hollow the old way, bind it into a living core and lock that vessel away forever, the way they did to Seraphine, condemning some future girl to 300 years in a tower. Or she can find the thing no emperor was ever willing to pay for. A way to end it, that costs the carrier, not an endless line of innocence after her. And in the wreck of the swallowed capital, with the prince holding the last line, and the old mage dead at her feet, and the woman she failed to save wearing the face of the thing killing her, Elysia finally understands what the seal has been trying to tell her since the day she awakened it at 15. There is a way to end the hollow for good. It has always been there, but it asks for the one price she spent 2 whole lifetimes learning how to refuse to pay. And if she's wrong about what it costs, she won't be the only one who doesn't walk away from it. She looks at Aurelius across the burning square. She looks at the gray tide rising, and she makes her choice. Her choice is this: she will not seal the hollow again. She will not do to some unborn girl what the Empire did to Seraphine. Hand down the cage like a cursed heirloom. Buy another 300 years of peace with another lifetime of somebody's suffering. Elysia has spent 2 lives being the price other people were willing to pay. She is done being that, and she refuses to make anyone else into it. So she is going to do the thing every emperor and archmage for 3 centuries swore was impossible. She is going to kill a thing that cannot be killed. But you cannot kill the hollow from the outside. Blades pass through it. Fire feeds it. Magic is swallowed. She learned that watching armies die, the only place the hollow can be ended is the one place it lives, inside a core, on the other side of a seal. And there is exactly one seal left in the world with a door, hers. So the plan that takes shape in the ruin of that burning square is so reckless that when she says it out loud, Aurelius physically takes her by the shoulders as if he could hold the idea still. She is going to let the hollow most of the way out. She is going to open her own seal, on purpose, and instead of fighting the darkness as it pours through her, she is going to pull it in, all of it, every last thread, into her own core, and then close the door behind it with the hollow on the inside, and Seraphine's stolen soul dragged out to safety. Trap the hunter in the last cage it will ever have, and then find a way to unmake the cage and the thing inside it together. It is, Vel's notes would have told her, if Vel were alive to say it, almost certainly suicide. A single human core was never built to hold the entire hollow. The old empire needed a bread vessel, a lifetime of preparation, and half the imperial bloodline's power, just to make the first seal hold a sleeping fraction of it. Elysia is proposing to swallow the whole waking thing with a core she awakened wrong, 10 years early, in a body that has already died once. If she fails, she does not just die. She becomes the new hollow, a fresh, young, powerful vessel worn as a mask, and the Empire's oldest death gets a second wind and a prettier face. So before she can even attempt it, she needs to become something she is not yet. She needs power. Real, disciplined, mastered power, not the desperate violet fire she's been burning through since she was 15. And she needs time the Empire does not have. Every hour the hollowing eats another mile, so the war changes shape. Aurelius and what remains of the Imperial army stop trying to defeat the hollow. They can't, and start trying to slow it, to buy Elysia the weeks she needs to become strong enough to end it. They give ground on purpose. They trade cities for days. It is an ugly, grieving kind of warfare, evacuating and retreating and burning the bridges behind them, and Aurelius ages a decade in a season doing it, because a crown prince learns fast that leadership is mostly deciding what you can bear to lose. And Elysia goes to ground to train, not in a palace, but in the one place the hollow's pull runs backward. Vale's final gift, scrawled in the margins of his oldest book, was a location. The ruin of the first seal, the original site 300 years ago, where the Empire bound the hollow into Seraphine. A place so saturated with old sealing magic that even now, drained and forgotten, it pushes the darkness away, the one safe island in a drowning world. Elysia, Aurelius when he can be spared, and Lyra make it their fortress. And there, on that haunted ground, Elysia finally does the work she skipped when she came back furious and 15 and hungry for revenge. She learns her own power from the ground up. It is not glamorous. For the first days she can barely touch the seal without the hollow's whisper flooding in, and every session ends with Lyra dragging her back from the edge of the dark. But slowly, painfully, she stops treating the forbidden core like a weapon she stole, and starts understanding it like a language she was born speaking. The violet mana was never really a curse or a gift. It is the seal itself, the binding magic of an entire fallen age. And once Elysia stops burning it and starts listening to it, it begins to teach her. She learns to shape it into wards that hold the dark at bay for hours instead of seconds. She learns to reach through it without opening it. She learns, terrifyingly, the shape of the door, how the seal opens, and, she hopes, how it might close on something far larger than it was ever built for. And she is not the only one who comes to that haunted ground. Word spreads, the way it does at the end of the world, that the champion who unmasked at the Awakening tournament is alive and fighting, that there is one place the dark cannot reach, and one person mad enough to try to end it. And they come. Not armies. The armies are with Aurelius, dying by inches. The ones who come to Elysia are the strays. A disgraced knight the great houses cast out. A pair of awakened commoners the guilds never let compete. A hedge witch from a border village that got hollowed, who lost everything, and has nothing left but a grudge against the dark, and a frightening amount of raw talent. The people the Empire threw away, gathering around the girl it threw away hardest, because she is the only one who ever treated their throwaway status as a reason to fight, rather than a reason to kneel. Elysia, who spent 2 lifetimes utterly alone, looks up one evening, and realizes she has something she never had in either life: people who chose her, and stayed. It should be the best thing that has ever happened to her. And that, of course, is exactly when the Empire's rot reaches even here. Because not every stray who comes to her is what they seem. The noble cabal, the men who once tried to hand her to the Hollow Queen to save their own skins, have not given up on the idea that the simplest way to survive the end of the world is to give the dark what it wants. And what it wants is Elysia's seal, broken cleanly, so the hollow spills out complete, instead of being swallowed and trapped. They cannot beat her in the open, so they do what frightened powerful men always do: they send someone close. A young awakened man arrives among the strays, wounded and grateful and gifted, with a story that checks out and a smile that reminds Elysia, faintly, uncomfortably, of another sweet-faced boy who once thanked her for everything and drove a dagger deeper. She ignores the feeling. She has spent so long learning to trust the people who chose her, that she has half forgotten how good the people who betray her are at wearing the face of someone worth choosing. He waits. He is patient, the way Seraphine was patient, the way the whole rotten machine of the Empire has always been patient with people it intends to use. He waits until the night Elysia finally cracks the last of it, until she stands in the ruin of the first seal, and for the first time, opens the door of her core a hair's breadth on purpose, and holds the whole screaming weight of the hollow at the threshold, and does not fall. And Aurelius and Lyra and the strays watch a girl the Empire branded a criminal do something 1,000 years of emperors could not. It is the triumph of her second life. She has become strong enough. The plan is real. They can end it. And in the raw, exhausted, joyful hush right after, when her guard is finally, humanly down, the sweet-faced young man steps close, as if to embrace her in celebration, and drives a blade of pure severing magic straight at the seal in her chest, exactly where a boy named Ren once put a dagger, to shatter the door and let the hollow out whole. It should have killed her. It should have ended the world. It doesn't, and the reason it doesn't breaks Elysia's heart in a way the betrayal itself never could. Because someone steps into the blade. Someone who should not be there at all. Someone Elysia buried in her heart a whole lifetime ago, and swore she would never let matter to her again. Ren, the real Ren, the youngest brother, the boy who thanked her and laughed while she died, has been following her since House Ravencroft fell, since the day she stripped him of everything, and cut him out of her heart, and told him he was no one. He has spent this whole descent trailing the Empire's end like a ghost, too ashamed to approach the sister he murdered in a life she alone remembers, too much a coward to beg forgiveness he knows he hasn't earned. And when the assassin's severing blade comes for her in the dark, that cowardly, ruined, unforgivable boy finally does one single brave thing in his whole small life. He gets in the way. He is not a great warrior. He is a disgraced noble's discarded youngest son with a stolen sword and a lifetime of being the weakest person in every room. The severing magic goes through him almost as easily as it would have gone through the air. But almost is a whole world of difference, and it is enough to foul the strike, enough to keep the blade from the seal, enough for Lyra's crossbow to punch the assassin off his feet, and for the strays to swarm him, and for Aurelius to reach Elysia before the second blow can land. The plan survives, the world survives, and Ren, the last of the 3 brothers who murdered her, folds down onto the same kind of cold stone she once bled out on, with the same kind of light going out of his eyes, looking up at the sister he betrayed. Elysia does not forgive him. That is important, and she knows it even as she kneels over him with her hands pressed uselessly to a wound no healer can close. She has learned the difference between mercy and being a doormat. She paid for that lesson with her life. She does not tell him it's all right, because it isn't. She does not tell him she loves him, because the boy she loved was a fiction he performed while he waited to kill her. But she stays. She does the one thing no one did for her on that marble floor, the one thing no one did for Seraphine in 300 years. She does not let him die alone in the dark, watched by people impatient for it to be over. She holds his hand while the light goes out, and when he tries, with the last of himself, to say the word sorry, she tells him the truest and hardest thing she has, that it does not fix anything, and that she is here anyway. And Ren, who wore a gentle smile his whole life as a mask over cruelty, dies with the first real and unperformed expression he has ever worn on his face. Plain, small, human gratitude, for a kindness he did nothing to deserve, from the one person alive with the most right to deny it to him. She burns the assassin's cabal out of her camp that same night, cold and thorough, and without a shred of the hesitation she might once have had. But something in her has shifted, and she feels it as she stands over Ren's body, watching the sun come up on a world with one day less left in it. She understands, finally and all the way to the bone, what she is actually fighting for. Not revenge. She got that, and it turned to ash the moment Vale told her what her power really was. Not even survival. She is fighting so that the machine stops. So that the Empire stops breeding people to be prices. So that no more sweet-faced boys are raised into monsters, and no more savior girls are locked in towers, and no more strays have to be brave and unforgivable and alone. She is going to swallow the oldest death in the world and choke it to death inside her own chest, and she is going to do it not out of hatred, but out of the most dangerous thing a thrown-away person can finally decide to feel, that the world is worth saving anyway, and that she is the one who gets to decide so. She has the power now. She has her people. She has a plan that can work. All that is left is to do the impossible thing, and to reach Seraphine, the hostage inside the enemy, before the Empire's oldest death notices that its last vessel has stopped being afraid. To reach Seraphine, Elysia has to march back into the dying heart of the Empire, because the Hollow Queen no longer hides at the edges. She sits, now, on the ruin of the Imperial capital itself, the city that once screamed for a commoner stray's execution, hollowed to a gray cathedral of ash and silence, with the burned-out throne at its center, and the woman in the gray hood on it. The hollow has stopped spreading outward. It doesn't need to. It has understood, with the cold patience of a thing that has waited 3 centuries, that the last vessel is coming to it, and it would rather fight her on a throne of its own making, than chase her across a world it can swallow at leisure. So it waits, wearing Seraphine's stolen face, in the seat of 1,000 years of the noble blood that made them both. The march to that throne is the longest of Elysia's 2 lives. What remains of the Empire moves with her now, not because the Emperor commands it, but because the Emperor is dead, taken in the fall of the capital, and the crown sits on Aurelius, who wears it like a wound. The golden-guarded boy Elysia first met is gone. In his place is a young king who has buried a father and 100,000 subjects, and learned that the only thing worth doing with a crown is spending it. He walks beside her into the gray, and the ragged column behind them is every kind of person the old Empire kept apart. The last disciplined regiments, and Elysia's camp of strays, border refugees and disgraced knights, guild hunters and hedge witches, commoners who have nothing left to protect but each other. It is, though no herald would ever phrase it so, the first time in the Empire's history that its thrown away and its highborn have marched under one banner toward one end. That the banner is Elysia's, a stray's, is a thing the surviving nobles choke on and follow anyway, because the alternative is the dark. They fight their way to the throne through the hollowed city, and it costs. The hollow does not send monsters. It sends worse. It reaches into the drained gray husks of the city's dead and stands them up, not as bodies, but as absences in the shape of the people they were, and the column has to cut its way through the hollowed remains of the very citizens they are dying to avenge. The hedge witch spends herself to the last drop holding a ward across a collapsing avenue and does not come out the other side. The disgraced knight who came to Elysia's camp with nothing but a grudge and a great sword, buys the breach they need with his life and looks almost happy doing it. A man the Empire discarded, finally allowed to matter. Every yard to that throne is paid for by someone the world never valued, and Elysia makes herself watch every payment, makes herself learn every name, because she has decided that the difference between her and the thing on the throne is precisely that she will not let a single one of them become a number. And then she is there, At the foot of the burned throne, in the dead center of the dead capital, standing before Seraphine, the Hollow Queen, exactly as she stood before her once already. But this time Elysia is not a lone girl making a desperate plea across 300 years of grief. This time she is strong enough. This time she has a plan. And this time she does not open by reaching for Seraphine's heart, because the Hollow has learned that trick, and guards it now. This time she opens by giving the Hollow exactly what it has wanted since the day she awakened her core at 15. She opens the door. She stops holding the seal shut. In front of the whole ragged army, at the foot of the throne, Elysia deliberately, willingly cracks open the last lock on the cage of the world's oldest death, and the Hollow, 3 centuries hungry, cannot help itself. It pours toward the opening, out of Seraphine, out of the Grey City, every last thread of that vast coiling absence rushing to escape through the one door left in the world. Which is precisely what Elysia needs it to do. Because a Hollow rushing out through her seal is a Hollow she can, with everything Veil taught her, and everything she bled to master on that haunted ground, seize at the threshold and pull the other way. Into her own core, into the cage of her own soul. She does not fight the flood. She swallows it. It is the most agony any living thing has ever survived, and for a while it is not clear that she will survive it. The entire Hollow, the death of an age, pouring into a single cracked human core built to hold a sleeping fraction of it. Elysia's body lifts off the ash, violet light tearing out of every seam of her, and the whisper that has haunted her since she was 15 becomes a scream inside her skull that is trying to hollow her out from within, to do to her in an instant what 300 years did to Seraphine. It offers her everything again, louder now, more desperate, power, oblivion, an end to the endless being used. It shows her the marble floor and the golden pocket watch and the boy's laugh. It presses every wound she has. It is inside her, and it knows her, and it is stronger than anything has any right to be. And this is the moment the whole impossible plan turns on, because Elysia cannot hold the Hollow alone. No single soul can. That was always the flaw in the old Empire's answer. The reason the first seal needed a bred vessel, and half a bloodline, and still only held a fraction. One girl, however strong, cannot cage the whole of it. But Elysia was never counting on being one girl. As the Hollow floods into her, and tries to drown her, she does the thing that is the exact opposite of everything the Empire ever taught about the seal. She does not carry it alone in a tower. She reaches out. Through the bond she has built brick by brick across her whole second life, she reaches for the people who chose her, and she asks, she who never in 2 lifetimes asked anyone for anything, for help. And they answer. Lyra, who has anchored her from the edge of the dark 100 times, anchors her now. Aurelius, who once promised to walk into the Empire's oldest nightmare rather than lose her, pours every scrap of his own will into hers through a bond neither of them ever said out loud. The strays, the hunters, the refugees, the disgraced and the discarded, the whole ragged army of the thrown away, they lend her what the old Empire's emperors, for all their bred vessels and hoarded bloodlines, never once thought to use, because it never occurred to them that the answer to an unbearable weight is simply enough hands. The seal that Seraphine carried alone for 3 centuries until it turned her to poison, Elysia carries for the length of a single unbearable minute, with 1,000 people holding her up. And it is enough. The door closes. The Hollow is inside her, the whole of it, trapped, screaming, caged in the one prison it can never eat its way out of, because that prison is a human soul that is not alone. But trapping it was never the plan. Trapping it just makes her the new Seraphine, a fresh vessel with the whole waking Hollow inside her, and 300 years of tower ahead. Trapping it is the beginning. Now she has to do the thing 3,000 years of history swore could not be done. Now, with the Hollow caged inside her own core, and Seraphine's stolen soul finally, for the first time in 3 centuries, shaken loose and drifting free, Elysia has to go in, one last descent, into her own drowning soul, and end the Empire's oldest death for good. And she is not going in alone this time either, because the one other person in all of history who knows the inside of that cage, who has lived in the dark with that thing for 300 years, who has more reason than anyone alive or dead to want it unmade, is finally, after 3 centuries of being worn like a mask, free enough to come with her. 2 vessels, 1 cage, the oldest death in the world between them. And for the first time since a frightened empire bred the first girl to be a price, the Hollow is going to face someone on the inside who is not carrying it alone. Inside the cage of her own soul, Elysia stands in the Black Cathedral one last time, And this time she is not alone. And this time the hollow is not lazily bored. It is cornered. For the first time in 300 years, the thing that spent centuries as the hunter is the hunted, sealed inside a soul it cannot drown, and it fights like it. It hurls at Elysia every death it has ever fed on, every face it wore, every wound it knows. It becomes the marble floor, becomes Cassian's pocket watch and Kale's bored smile, becomes Ren's laugh, becomes the mob that screamed for her execution in 2 separate lives, becomes every single moment the world taught her she was nothing. It is trying to convince her, even now, even caged, that she is empty enough to belong to it, that a thrown-away girl has no self-worth saving, so she may as well let go and let it wear her. And beside her, at last, stands Seraphine, not the hollow queen, not the gray-hooded horror that walked through swallowed cities, but the woman underneath, shaken loose from 3 centuries of being a mask. She is thin and flickering and barely herself, a soul that has been worn so long it has half forgotten its own shape. But she is her, the girl from the diary, the one who once wanted a garden and a house and someone to remember her name. And she looks at the hollow wearing all of Elysia's wounds and she says, in a voice like the ghost of the woman she used to be, "It did this to me too. Every day for 300 years. It told me I was empty until I believed it. And the terrible thing, little sister," and here her flickering face does something that might once have been a smile, "is that it was lying the whole time. There was always someone in here. There was always me. It just made sure no one ever came to look." That is the weapon, not the violet fire, not the mastered mana, not the 1,000 hands holding the seal shut in the world above. The thing that can actually end the hollow is the one thing it has spent its entire existence making impossible. 2 of its victims, in the dark, refusing to be empty, and refusing to be alone. Because the hollow was never really hunger, and it was never really hatred. Elysia understood that much the first time it tempted her. The hollow is absence. It is the hole the world leaves in a person when it uses them up and throws them away and makes sure no one comes back for them. It has been eating light and life and magic for 1,000 years, but the thing it actually feeds on, the only thing that has ever truly sustained it, is the certainty of the discarded that no one will ever come. It is loneliness given teeth, and it cannot survive being seen. So they see it. Together the 2 thrown-away vessels stop fighting the hollow the way armies fought it. With force, with fire, with everything it eats, and they do to it the one thing no one has ever done. They fill it. Elysia pours into that vast starving absence every single thing her second life gave her that her first one didn't. Lyra's stubborn loyalty, Aurelius's hand crushing hers, the strays who chose her, the bordered child at the well, Ren's small unforgivable bravery, every name she made herself learn on the march to the throne, and Seraphine, the girl who has had 300 years to store up nothing but hatred, discovers in the bottom of herself one last hoard she never spent. The ordinary, stubborn, unkilled longing for a garden and a home and a life. The small human wanting the hollow could never quite eat because she never quite stopped feeling it. Between them, the 2 of them pour a whole world of presence into the one thing that has only ever known absence. And the hollow, for the first time in 1,000 years, is full. And a thing that is only a hole, filled, is simply gone. There is no explosion, no last roar. The oldest death in the world, cornered in the cage of a soul that would not be empty and would not be alone, is quietly, completely, and permanently unmade, filled in like a grave, closed over like a wound that has finally been allowed to heal. It does not sleep. It does not pass to a new vessel. It ends. After 1,000 years and 2 seals and countless dead, the thing the Empire could only ever cage is finished by the 2 girls it bred to be its cages, using the exact thing the Empire denied them both. But endings have prices, and Elysia knew the shape of this one before she ever opened the door. The seal was never just a lock, it was a binding, woven into a living core, and when the hollow is unmade the binding unravels with it, and the forbidden violet power that has defined Elysia across 2 lifetimes, the mana that made her a champion and a monster, and a savior, goes out of her like a tide going out and does not come back. The seal is spent, the core is dark. Elysia, who awakened at 15 wrong and early and hungry, who burned through her own power for revenge, who became the most feared young talent in the Empire, ends the fight as something she has not been since she was a nameless orphan in a crumbling church. Ordinary, powerless. A girl with no mana, and no title magic, and nothing left in her chest but a human heart, kneeling in the ash of a saved world. And she finds, to her own surprise, that she does not mind, that maybe it is even the point. Because the last thing she does before the light goes out of her core entirely is turn to Seraphine, free at last, 3 centuries too late, flickering at the edge of a peace she was denied so long she barely recognizes it. There is not enough of Seraphine left to save. 300 years as a mask took what it took, but there is enough left to release, and so the very last of Elysia's borrowed, dying power does not go to saving herself, or the Empire, or anything grand. It goes to giving one forgotten girl the one thing the whole world owed her, and never paid. Elysia reaches out and gives Seraphine, in the space behind her eyes where 3 centuries of hatred used to live, a garden, a small house, a quiet morning, someone who remembered her name long enough to say it. And Seraphine, the first vessel, the forgotten savior, the monster who was only ever a girl no one came back for, finally gets to rest. "Thank you," she says. And unlike every other time those words appear in Elysia's story, this time they are true, and this time they are earned, and this time no one dies alone in the dark. She simply, gently, goes. Elysia wakes in the world above, with Aurelius's face over hers and Lyra gripping her hand, and a gray city already, impossibly, beginning to take back its color at the edges, because a world with the hollow gone is a world that can heal. She wakes powerless, and titleless in every way that the old magic measured, and she has never in 2 lifetimes felt less like a price, and more like a person. The empire she saved is not the empire that murdered her. There is not much left of the old one to argue, and on its ashes, on terms astray dictated to a kneeling court, and a young king who loved her enough to keep every one of them, they build something that has never existed in 1,000 years of noble blood. A world where no child is bred to be a cage, where the forbidden manna trade that funded the great houses is ash, where the orphanages her bloodline was hunted through are protected by a king's own hand, and where the thrown away are not, anymore, thrown away. It is not a perfect world. She is not a naive girl who believes in those. But it is a world that stopped feeding on its own, and she is the one who made it stop, and she did it not with the power she lost, but with the thing she found. The refusal, learned across 2 deaths, to let anyone be alone in the dark. As for the brothers who started it all, on that first cold marble floor, their story ends exactly as small as they always secretly were. Cassian, the perfect heir, is a stripped and imprisoned man whose name is a byword for the old rotten empire that died. Kale, the genius, powerless and forgotten, is proof that being adored was never the same as being worth anything. And Ren got the one thing the other 2 never will, which is to have mattered, once at the very end, for a single brave and unforgivable second, to the sister he betrayed. House Ravencroft is not just fallen, it is a lesson children are taught so that it never happens again. Elysia got her revenge in the first part of this story, and she has learned since that revenge was the least interesting thing she was ever capable of. What she built after is the part that lasts. And in the quiet after, in a small house, with a garden, beside a young king who never once needed her to be a weapon or a savior or a price, only herself, Elysia the orphan, the champion, the vessel, the girl the world threw away twice and could not kill, finally gets the thing she gave Seraphine at the very end. A morning, a name said with love, a life that is hers. The dark came for her 3 times across 2 lifetimes, and 3 times it learned the same lesson, that the most dangerous thing in any world is not power, or vengeance, or an ancient god of absence. It is a thrown-away person who decides, against every reason the world ever gave her, that she is worth coming back for, and then comes back for everyone else too. That is the whole story of Elysia. The regressed heiress who was murdered by her brothers, who came back through time for revenge, and who ended up saving the very world that discarded her, on her own terms, and finally coming home. If you rode all the way to the end with her, thank you, genuinely. Drop a comment with the part that got you. Tell me which character you love to hate the most, and if you want more full-length stories like this one, betrayed heroines, regressors, villainesses, and the long climb from thrown away to unstoppable, subscribe to Manhwaverse and hit the bell, because the next girl the world underestimates is already waiting. I'll see you in the next one.